Can you hear me, Doug? Really? So I have to stay behind the podium? I like to walk around. Okay, I'll just stay in this vicinity. How's that? If everybody would continue to eat, and I will begin my story while you continue to eat. So everybody here knows me, Deacon Rick Boyle. So I got out of the Marine Corps in 1987, and immediately after Debbie and I reset, we're born and raised Kansas City, St. Mary's Hospital, and Debbie and I are high school sweethearts, so we're both from Kansas City. So we resettled here after I got out of the Marine Corps, and after I settled, I got very active in the Knights of Columbus, serving most offices in the council, serving as a district deputy, serving several state office positions. And I started, probably back in around 2004. Bishop Bolin was a bishop, and Ross Bedoin was the director of diaconate formation. I started checking into the vocation of a permanent deacon. And so at that time, the diocese had a program called the New Wine Program. Now, the New Wine Program was not part of the diaconate program. It was for anybody that wanted to learn more about their faith, but it was a prerequisite to becoming a deacon. So I thought, well, after talking to Ross, I would take, this was like mid-year, probably maybe early 2005, January, February. I thought, well, next year I'll take the New Wine Program and see how this continues. Well, in May, Bishop Bolin retires. Bishop Finn comes in, and the first thing he does was he stops the New Wine Program, and he stops the diaconate formation. He's going to come in and kind of rework the programs and make sure that everything's the way he wants us to see them done in the diocese. So there was a stop on the program for a couple of years, I guess, and then he restarted the program. I think around 2006. And so that would be the class before mine. And I applied to that class. Now, when you apply to diaconate formation, there's three answers that you're going to get. You're going to get, yes, you're accepted into formation. No, you're not accepted in formation. And if you get a no, you can't reapply. You're done. The third is called a deferral. The deferral doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. It says, hey, we think there's potential there. There might be a calling to the diaconate. They actually recommended a spiritual director for me, which at the time was Father Mike Roach. So I would come here once a month and meet with Father Mike Roach. So I got a deferral to the next class. So it is 4 years between classes. And I really got depressed about it, thinking, maybe I'm not doing, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. God's putting up these roadblocks. First I wanted to try and it stopped the program. Then I try again and I didn't get accepted. And I thought, there's something there. So I was actually up at Conception Abbey. And the new director of diaconate formation was Dwayne Katzer. Now, I knew Dwayne. I knew what he looked like. I'd never met him before, but I knew he was the director of diaconate formation. I knew what he looked like. And I was at Conception Abbey, and I was there chaperoning the confirmation kids from Good Shepherd. And so I got up early one morning, waiting for the kids to get up so we go to do breakfast in the morning, and I was just sitting outside. And I just prayed that I didn't know what God was calling me to do. Were these signals not to go into the diaconate, or were they tests, or what were they? So I literally just said, God, if you want me to apply to the diaconate, send me a strong, clear sample. I'm a very simple person. I need a sign. And within 2 minutes, Dwayne Katzer walks out the door and walks right by me down the sidewalk. And I go, "You're Dwayne Katzer, Director of Diaconate Formation." He goes, "Yep." And I go, "I got the sign." So Dwayne and I talked for a little bit. And then when the next class rolled around, I applied to that class, and I was accepted, and I'm here now. I spent my first 4 years at Good Shepherd. I'd been a Good Shepherd since the late 80s. And people ask me, they think I live in Smithville. I don't. I live in Platte City. So it made the transition here pretty easy because the distance between my house and Good Shepherd and my house here is almost equal. So anyways, that was my calling into the diaconate. It was not as simple and not as easy as a lot of people think. It was a little bit of work and a lot of praying on my part, but I honestly believe today that I'm doing what God wants me to do. I believe that He wants me to be a deacon, and I believe, as sure as I'm standing here, that He wants me to serve as a police chaplain, which is what I'm doing for my ministry of service. So that's really my story. I'm open for questions if anybody has any questions. How did the Marine Corps? Well, it made me grow up real fast, first of all. It straightened me out, took me from a snotty teenager to a young man. You know, the Marine Corps, the Army, the Air Force, it's service. It's all about service. And I believe that from high school, because I'm a cradle Catholic, I served as an altar boy from as soon as I could until I was a teenager. I believe that God's been grooming me for service from the day I was born. And I think the Marine Corps is just part of that grooming of service. So, yes. The Navy. Well, I'll have to think about that one. Yeah, we protected you too, so. Yes. How did you get involved as a police chaplain? How did that come about? Again, it's one of those epiphanies. So in your close to your last year of formation, you have to come up with a service project, and it's got to be approved by the diocese. And most of us in class will continue to do that. We have to do a complete report on it. What the service project is, how it, helps out and how it's needed and such. And it's approved by the diaconate office, and then you give a report to the class. And most of us will go into that service project after ordination. And I was actually I didn't know what. So I called, Veronica's Voice. I called City Union Mission. I called all over the place saying, yeah, do you need a chaplain? Do you need this? Hospital chaplains. I mean, I checked everywhere. And the door was really closed on me. Everywhere I looked, it was really cold. It wasn't accepting. It wasn't a fit. And I actually asked Father Mike Roach one time. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got to get this approved, and the next week I get started on it. And Father Mike said, stop looking in Kansas City. Look in your own town. Look in your own backyard. Stop looking in, all over the place. And so I went into the Platte City Police Department, saw the chief of police, and I said, do you have a chaplain here? He said, no. And I said, well, I explained I'm going through formation. Hopefully I'll be ordained in about a year. And I'm, looking at the possibility of police chaplain. And his first response was, where have you been? I've been looking for you. Literally. So I've actually been I officially was a police chaplain for the Platte City Police Department a year before I was ordained, because he immediately made me a police chaplain. So in April 2013, I became a police chaplain for the Platte City Police Department. 2014, I was ordained, and now I'm also a police chaplain for the Missouri Highway Patrol. More questions? Yes. What I do as a police chaplain, the number one ministry of a police chaplain is to serve the police officers, and it's officer wellness, and that's what I'm trained for. And I belong to the International Conference of Police Chaplains. I've been trained for critical incident debriefings, responses. That's my primary mission. However, what I do most of the time is work with the citizens, doing death notifications, being with them at scenes, whether the scene's a bad accident, house burnt down, a lot of domestics. So the police officers, I'm a tool for the police officers. Just like all their equipment on their uniform, I'm at their service. And when I can help them be a better police officer, that's when they call me. So, and being pastorally trained, a lot of times that has to do with life and death circumstances. Father Randy was a police chaplain for many years, and him and I have talked a lot about it. And a lot of it has to do with death and things like that. That's what I do most of the time. That's what I'm called for most of the time. Sometimes it's dealing with homeless people and such, but the main ministry is officer wellness. Yes. Well, unlike priests who really are at the whim of the bishop to some degree, it's a conversation. And I think the same thing's true with priests. It's a conversation. The bishop's not going to force anyone to go where they don't want to go. And since I'm not supported by the church or the diocese, since I have a house, I have a secular job, I have a family and stuff, the bishop has to keep that into consideration if he wants to move me somewhere else. Obviously, he has a job of trying to equalize his assets around the diocese, making sure that everybody's covered, everything's served, and such like that. But honestly, the bishop can't just say, you have to go. I mean, I guess he can, but it's not going to work out. The bishop, it's a conversation. So when I was asked to come here, actually, the diaconate office called me and asked if I would consider going to St. Therese, that they were really needing a deacon down here. And the first thing I did was I called Father Joe. And I came down here and I met with him. And then I attended Mass. And I know Doug. Doug and I are classmates. We are ordained together. And so then I believe I came back with my wife. And he met Debbie. And so it was finally, I went back to the bishop. And I didn't say yes or no. I said, if you believe this is for the good of the diocese, I will move to St. Therese. And so now here I am. So I didn't say yes, I want to go. I didn't say no, I don't want to go. I said, basically, Bishop, I'm willing to go where you want me to go. Yes.
So this is a 4-year program, like maybe part-time?
Yeah, it's actually, there's multiple phases. From the time you start applying, right, which is an ordeal in itself, it's actually a 5-year program. So you've got about 6 months of where you got to apply, you get letters of recommendation, you get interviewed, and then when you get accepted, it's another 4.5 years. It's usually 2 weekends a month. I think the first weekend of the month we went to Conception Abbey. The third weekend of the month we went to different parishes throughout the diocese and met on a Saturday. So it's one weekend, Friday through Sunday, and then one weekend, a Saturday all day. So, yes.
Is it correct that your wife typically goes through the program with you?
Yes, absolutely. And Kathy can probably answer most questions about the wives in diaconate formation. But Debbie loved to joke about the fact that she said what she called her ace of spades up her sleeve. Our wives at any time could call the diocese and say, it's not working out in the family, I want them out, and we're out, no questions asked. Every year we're interviewed. We sit down as a couple in the interview, and we talk for about 15, 20 minutes. Then they take us out and talk to the wife alone so she can feel comfortable talking without us knowing what she says. And when it comes time for ordination, she has to write a letter of her own hand, not typed, in a separate envelope, handwritten, hand addressed, everything to the bishop, saying that it's okay if we're ordained. So the diocese takes very seriously our first vows, our wedding vows, and we cannot let this affect or hurt those vows. Anybody have any other questions? Yes. I have 3 daughters. They are 35, 31, and 21. And this May, Debbie and I will have been married 37 years. It's 30-something, 37, I believe. No grandkids yet. Only one of my daughters is married, and she lives in Ohio. No grandkids yet. So, any other questions? Well, I graduated from Lawson. Debbie and I both graduated from Lawson, Missouri. So if y'all know where Lawson is, I was married at St. Anne's Catholic Church in Excelsior Springs. So we're country people from over there. My dad had a small farm, and I have to get up and chop ice in the pond so that the cows could drink and throw square bales of hay and all that fun stuff. So we born and raised Kansas City. Born, like I said, St. Mary's Hospital here in Kansas City. So was Debbie. So any other questions? Yes. It's not easy. It's really not easy. It is a balancing act between family and church and ministry and my other job. And that's Debbie helps me keep that in order. And if something gets out of balance, she helps me put it back into balance. So we're a team, and she keeps me hopefully on the right path. So, what's my other job? My family, my dad started a fabric wholesale warehouse 50 years ago. And so I actually run our family business. It's called Richland Fabrics. We're fabric wholesale in North Kansas City. And so I wholesale fabric to retailers and manufacturers in all 50 states and about 7 or 8 countries. So, by the way, so that Doug doesn't tell you differently, we're classmates, right? I'm a B, he's a W. I'm at least 10 minutes seniority on him. Thank you. 10 minutes. Don't you think it took that long to get through a class?
He may have 10 minutes of seniority on the class, but I have seniority on being here. So a few weeks ago you had Father Angel, and I really liked his style of giving you key points along the way of his journey. And he started, I think, around 4 years old or something like that, Father, when you saw the first priest. 6 years old, okay? And I'm going to beat that, too. I'm going to start when I was 2.5, okay? Don't remember it, but I'll tell you why here in a second. Some of you have heard this story. When I was between 2 and 2.5, my mother walked into the bedroom late at night. It was about 2 in the morning, actually, and I was coughing violently and turning blue. And so she called our doctor, who was also a St. Charles parishioner, and he said, "I'll meet you at St. Mary's Hospital." That was the closest hospital in those days because we didn't have North Kansas City Hospital in those days. And so, oh, by the way, have your brother, my brother, hold me upside down by the ankles and keep pounding on my back to keep my airways open so I could get to the hospital. So I ended up in the hospital. My mother ended up in what was in the surgical waiting room, which was 2 folding chairs right outside of the operating room with my brother. And so she sat down as I went immediately into surgery, and she immediately went into her purse and started praying the rosary, which she's prone to do. And so she started praying the rosary, and in the course of praying the rosary, about 20 minutes in, she saw a vision of Mary coming out of the operating room with a smile on her face. So she was feeling pretty good. About 20 minutes later, she saw another vision of Mary coming out of the operating room, smiling. She felt pretty good. About another 20 minutes later, she saw another vision of Mary coming out of the operating room with a smile on her face, and she was feeling pretty good. But about 20 minutes later, the doctor comes out, and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, Rose, but your son's dead." And she said, "No, he can't be dead. Mary wouldn't be smiling at me if he was dead. No, go back in and check." And the doctor said, "I assure you, he's been dead for quite some time, and we've been trying to revive him. And no, he's been dead." And my mother wouldn't hear of it, and my father had gotten there from work. He was a TWA guy and came down from work, and he said, "Clay, you're going to have to go back in there. She's not going to take this as an answer. Just go back in." And so he went in and kind of in disgust threw his hand into my chest. And then he listened, and my heart was beating again. And so then he sent the nurse out and said, "Do you really want us to recover him? Because he's going to be brain dead. He's been without oxygen for over an hour." And she said, "Mary wouldn't be smiling at me if he was going to be brain dead. So yes, revive him. Get him upstairs and get him back in his room, and he'll be fine." And so the doctor did. Now, I had a tracheotomy amongst other things. And so I came out of the operating room with a tube in my throat, went upstairs. I didn't move for 24 hours. They really did start to think that maybe I was brain dead. And then all of a sudden I woke up and asked where my toys were. And my mother was like, "See, see, see." And Clay was like, "I don't believe this. I just don't believe that he could have survived that." Well, because of that story, my mom started telling me that story as soon as I could even understand what was going on. And she taught me the rosary. So somewhere between 4 and 5 years old, I was praying the rosary. So we'll fast forward just a little bit, and I go into first grade. And I'm at St. Charles. And I'm only 2 blocks away. And they decide I'm going to be an altar boy in first grade. And, Sister Claire Marie asked me if I'd mind being an altar boy. I said, "No, I won't mind being an altar boy." "Well, that's good, Doug, because for the next few months, you don't get to go to recess. You have to learn Latin to respond to the prayers." What did I just do? So I learned the Latin prayers. I was all ready to go. She called Monsignor Wogan and said, "We have a new altar boy." And Monsignor said, "Oh, not so fast. He has to be able to do First Communion first. So we'll go ahead and put him with the second graders and get him through First Communion." So I got First Communion. And being 2 blocks away, I was running back and forth to his church all the time, because in those days, the priests all got up early, and they went to different altars and said Mass, and they didn't have enough altar boys, and so I was only 2 blocks away. And Monsignor Wogan, I was his favorite, because he'd call me, and he said, "You can get here in 5 minutes, you can have $1. And I was there in 4 minutes, I guarantee you, I was there. And so that's the point where I started thinking, I want to be a priest, but I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought through the rest of grade school. And I get over to high school. Right before I get over to high school, I realized that my mom was, I was saying the rosary with my mom every day. First thing in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, she'd get up to get my father breakfast, and part of that routine was to say the rosary. So I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning, say the rosary with her. Then at 7 o'clock at night, she said the rosary. So I'd say the rosary with her at 7 o'clock at night. That's all I thought she was saying. But I found out in 8th grade that she was saying the rosary about noon. And so I started saying the rosary that last summer with her whenever I was home. I go over to St. Pius, and I had gotten into the habit of saying 3 rosaries a day, saying the rosary with my mom. Go over to St. Pius and go into the cafeteria, and I'd go over in the corner and say a rosary before I'd eat lunch. And so the kids were sitting there saying to me, my friends, "You want to be a priest or something? You're saying all these prayers. You want to be a priest?" And I really didn't respond to them. I didn't really know, but I started thinking about it really seriously about then. Senior year of high school, I come home one night, and I sit down, and my parents are there, and I announce that I want to be a priest. "I'm going to be a priest, Dad." My dad says, "Oh, no." And my dad was hung up about this, and so my mother looked at me and said, "You got to honor your father, so try to find some middle ground." I'm like, middle ground, okay. So we agreed that I would go to school and get a college degree, and then I could pursue the priesthood. Okay, so I go down to University of Missouri. I don't really know what I want to study. My brother went into engineering, so well, what the heck, I'll just go into engineering. I got into engineering, and I got out in 7 semesters, and I run home, and I pull up, and I realized, well, I can't really start seminary in January. I'd have to wait until the fall. So I better get a job. So I got a job with Hallmark Cards as an engineer. And the very next thing I did is I went back to St. Charles, went to the pastor who was Father Bill Bowman. I said, I want to be a priest. How do I become a priest? Father Bill says, well, let's talk about your life so far. And so we started talking, and he was not impressed with my dating scene or lack of very much. I didn't really go out with many ladies that was going to interfere with me being a priest, so I didn't go out. And so he said, well, I really want you to date a few young ladies before you really take this plunge. And he says, and I know you pretty well. We had played a lot of golf and tennis together, and he said, you got to take these young ladies out for more than one date at a time, change ladies. You got to get serious about somebody, okay? Okay, well, the dating scene was not really the easiest thing for me to get into, and it took me a while, and so it's about 2.5 years later, and I meet this young lady at Hallmark who is living in my apartment complex, and we started playing tennis together and running in the running club. And 2 years of dating her, I thought, well, that's probably, and actually I started to get the call to be married. I thought, well, I'm discerning I should be married. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. 2 weeks later, we broke it off. And that was that. And I said, okay, that was clear, God. Now I'm ready. I'm ready. I go back to Father Bowman, and he says, oh, we can't have a rebound priest. No rebound priest here. So you got to start dating again. And, we'll know when it's right. We'll know when it's right. Well, I started dating again, and then I went through I decided I am never dating another Hallmark woman, because you run into them in the halls when you break up with them, and I was just awkward. And so a little bit later, my career was going along. I was moving along in Hallmark in different places. I started out doing one-of-a-kind piece of equipment, and then I did some product quality, and then I got a really interesting assignment. I was one of 5 engineers amongst 800 artists. Logic and creativity together. It was really a fun time. And we were just, the artists would come up with one-of-a-kind piece of thing that they sculpted and wanted to get to the market, and you couldn't even make it. And so I was having to try to figure out what could I do close to that. In the meantime, I get assigned a business unit, the party business unit, to work with, because they want to restage their line. And so they want to rebuild their line. They want to make it new. They want different products. So I'm working with the business unit, which was a little bit more comfortable for me because they're a little more logical than the creative side. I'm left brain, they're right brain. It was like kind of all the time. And so I get an assistant product manager to work with me in the party line, and she wants all these different paper plate shapes and all these different party products. And then I start working with the artists, and we created it kind of backdoor. But we worked together for a year and a half. We became really close friends, but I'd sworn off Hallmark women. I wasn't going to date any Hallmark women. And so we went to a lot of meetings for a year and a half, and we got to know each other. But then the project was over, and I got assigned another product line. Well, now comes the kicker, because I just wanted to know. We had talked about where her house was. It was only about 3/4 of a mile from my house, and I wanted to know what a product manager could afford versus what an engineer could afford, okay? So I decided I was going to sneak by and see what her house looked like. I was doing the MS 150, and I was training. So I got on my bike. I'm riding out there to go over there, and I wanted to sneak by the house to see where it was, and that backfired because she and her mother were out in the front yard planting geraniums. And so I had to stop and talk. I couldn't just ride by, so I stopped and talked. And we ended up talking for 45 minutes to an hour in front. And I went on to ride with my friends to do a training ride. And she walks back up the driveway and sees her mother. And her mother says, what was that all about? And he says, he's going to ask me out. He's going to ask me out. Well, she was right, because 4 hours later I called her up and asked her out. Hallmark women, here we go. Well, that ends up being my wife. And 363 days later, Kathy and I get married. And been happily married for almost 38 years. In May, so we're close, Rick. And so now I'm going to fast forward again because, okay, I've kind of given up on priesthood with marriage, right? And that's good. That's what God, I discerned that call. I actually didn't ask her to marry me I knew I wanted to marry her 2 weeks after I started dating her. I was that sure. But I was praying to God, is this really what you want me to do? Is this really what you want me to do? And I got a loud and clear, yes, that's really what I want you to do. So off I go, and off we go, and fast forward about another 9 years, and Hallmark comes to me and says, we want you to move from Lawrence, Kansas. I was in Lawrence at the time. They want me to move to Columbus, Georgia, and be down there on the staff for a printing plant. And, the boss, the vice president of production, who's like 3 bosses above me, doesn't come out to your office and ask you to do something like this unless you really want to do it. You really didn't have a choice. But he sent us down there to look over the plant. Kathy and I looked over the plant. We were really nervous because the people were really different. They were from the South, but they just had a different style and talked about things that just made us uncomfortable. But I went back, told the boss, yeah, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do that. He said, okay, it'll be a 1.5-year assignment. So off we go to Georgia for a 1.5-year assignment with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, son and daughter. And it was about, I don't know, Kathy, maybe a year and a half into the assignment, and we were looking at each other going, what are we doing down here? It was a high anxiety job. Everybody every manager in the plant was doing something wrong, crooked, not just doing their job wrong, but crooked. And I was like, this is not for me. What are we here for? And both of us got the answer at the same time. We're here to get closer to God. We got to focus on God. Well, we'd already been at the parish. St. Anne Parish was almost the exact same size as St. Therese because it was the only Catholic church in Columbus, Georgia. There's 27 pages of Baptist churches in Columbus, Georgia, but they're the only. So we decided we got to get much more involved. And so we started a couple scripture study. All of a sudden, Father liked what we were doing with our kids on baptism because we told them we'd go to 4:30 Mass, and we'd tell our kids, if you get it wrong, we got 3 more Masses tomorrow to get it right. And we showed up at Palm Sunday Mass at 4:30 and back at 8 o'clock because they got it wrong. And the priest was like, what are you doing here? And we told him the story, and he says, you're my baptismal prep couple. And so we got into baptismal prep. Shortly thereafter, we got into wedding prep. Kathy was on the pastoral council. I was on the financial council. We were really involved. Fast forward a couple more years, this man comes to be a transitional deacon at our parish, and we met him. Interesting guy. He didn't even start his vocation until he was 42. He was a multimillionaire and gave up a business of 5 sporting goods stores that were bigger than Dick's in Augusta, Georgia, to come into the priesthood. And we met him, and we liked him, and then lo and behold, a year later, he gets assigned to us permanently as a priest. And so the other thing he did, not just owning sporting goods stores, but he was a very influential football referee. He was in a lot of the big conferences in the Southeast, and he was a referee, and he had to give that up, obviously, when he went into the priesthood. I think Father Randy could be a referee, but, haven't talked to him. But he... at the same time he came over to us, we got a high school. We were just the lucky recipients of a diocesan high school that happened to be next door to our grade school there. And it came to us in our parish with $2.5 million worth of debt. We were so lucky. We were out of debt in the church, but now all of a sudden we got a $2.5 million in debt high school. And so Father Mike, this priest, he comes with the idea, we got to get enrollment up. And the way we're going to get enrollment up is we're going to open the door to the football stadium, and we're going to let every kid that wants to come in here with their parents, so maybe they get excited about Pacelli High School. So second game of the season, our kids are there. They're gung-ho. They're in the stadium, but they're over on the softball field playing all kinds of games. They're not in watching football, but that's okay. But we're there, and Father Mike yells up at me and says, Doug, you want to watch a football game from down here with me? And he was chaplain. So I went down on the field with him as a chaplain. And he is sitting there, and he is yelling encouragement out to these kids. He is yelling at the top of his lungs. He's telling them to look out for this play. This is going to happen. Do this. And then about every ninth yell, he'd turn to me and he's yell at me. I'm a foot away from him. At the same voice, he's yelling to these kids. And he looks at me and says, "Have you thought about the diaconate?" I'm like, the only deacons I'd seen up to that point were transitional deacons. I had not seen a permanent deacon. I didn't know what he was talking about. For the rest of the game, he's yelling at me every 10th, 9th, 10th time, yelling at me right next to my ear, trying to explain what the permanent diaconate was. By the time the game was over, I was so confused. I was deaf in one ear and confused. I didn't really know what he had told me. And so that was on a Friday night. Monday morning, he shows up over at my plant. And I'm in a production meeting. And I have my 5 major managers in my office, and we're talking about production. And he just blows right by my secretary. My secretary saying, "No, you can't go in. No, 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 no." And he comes right in my door in my office. And he's got a stack of 12 books. And he slaps them down on my desk. And he says, "You have a homework assignment. You read one of these books a week, and then you call me up. We'll go out for coffee or lunch, and we'll talk about the diaconate." And then he leaves. And these Baptist managers are all looking at the books and looking at me and like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So I got about 3 books into that program, and I started getting a call. I started hearing a voice from God saying, "You really need to give this some thought." So I picked up the phone. I called the Diocese of Savannah. We were in Columbus, Georgia. We were clear across the state. Diocese of Savannah is at least 4.5, 5-hour drive away. At the time, it was Bishop Kevin Bolin. You guys had Bishop Raymond Bolin. We had Bishop Kevin Bolin, his brother. But I called over there and I said, "What does it take to be a deacon in this diocese? What is the program?" And they said, "Well, just like Rick explained, it was almost the same program. 1 week a month, you got to come. We go to one. You got to drive all the way over to Savannah to have a class in the cathedral on Saturday, and then 2 weeks later, on the 3rd week of the month, you have to drive to New Orleans, 6.5 hours away, one way, and go to 3 days of class, Friday, Saturday, Sunday." My kids were really little. This wasn't going to work. So, into my call for a little while. Now, 6.5 years into my 1.5-year assignment in Georgia, they finally call me and say, "We got another job for you." So I go in and I go, they didn't want me to come home yet. They sent me to Kennebunk, Maine. But this time they sent me without my family. They said, "You can commute every week." I'm like, "Really?" Well, I made them sign paper this time. 1 year to the date I would do this. So I went up there. It was actually a kind of a weird experience because it really brought me closer to my family, because I would talk via the internet with webcams were brand new, and I'd talk to my children via webcam. Kathy would tell me what book they were reading, and I'd go to the library and we'd read the book together long distance. And when I did get to come home, I came home for 5-day weekends, and I'd go into school and work with them and sit down with all the kids in school. I started getting the calling again, sitting there with the kids in school, like, I should really be doing something with these kids somehow. So anyway, fast forward again about 4 more years, I get to come back to Kansas City, finally get to come back to Kansas City, pick up the phone, call the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph, said, "How do I become a deacon?" "Oh, you got to be in your parish for 3 years before you can be considered." Okay. 3 years to the date, I call up the diocese again. I said, "Okay, I've been here 3 years. I'd really like to be, what process do I go to?" Deacon Dwayne Kotzer, who you talked about, says, "Well, you have to fill out the paperwork, but the last class was just chosen 6 weeks ago. You have to wait 4 more years." So I'm like, "Really, God? Is this really what you want me to do?" But the whole time in our conversation, God was very clear. This is what I want you to do. I want you to be involved with your church, but in a different way than just volunteering. I want you to be involved and help people out. And so this time I didn't wait 4 years. I called after 3 years and called after 3 years and a month and 3 years and 2 months. And then finally they let me fill out the paperwork and they accepted me. And the rest of it's history. I entered the same classes as Rick, and we went through formation together with started out with 17 guys. We ended up with 13 guys that were ordained. And it was a wonderful experience, the ordination process. Along the way, very early on, Father Rush from Visitation signed my paperwork that said, yes, he could be a deacon. I think he can be a deacon. But then he very quickly said, but not here, because I don't want deacons anymore. So from the very beginning of my class, I was on the available list, the free agent list. And I was looking for a parish. And my meetings with that Rick talked about, where we met and we talked to husband and wife, and then most of my meetings were the people saying, are you okay not going back to Visitation? I said, I'm good with wherever he sends me. Well, Father Joe was our spiritual director of the diaconate, and he had a job opening here as a pastoral associate. And so I came up here as a pastoral associate in May of 2013 with a, Father, can you do anything to talk to the bishop about maybe getting me assigned here? And there were some conversations that went on, and at the time it was Bishop Finn, and Bishop Finn was very candid with me, and he said, if I'm still here, you're at St. Therese. If I'm still in the bishop's spot, you're at St. Therese. We were ordained, and I was assigned here. And like Rick, I've loved every minute of it here. It took me about a year and a half to move, but I got up here because I wanted to be close and be close to the parish. And living in the Brookside area was like a 30-minute drive up here, and I was finding out I was barely getting home and getting asked to come back, and that just wasn't working. So we moved up here, and we've been in Parkville since 2015 and have just loved it and loved being here. So that's kind of my vocation story, with one last caveat. The caveat is that what I've found out with our Lord is you really have to stop and listen, but he doesn't talk to you here. He talks to you here. And so when you go in church and you're having that silent meditation time, that prayer time that you go in to have, don't be listening for him to speak in your ears. He speaks through your heart. You have to feel him. And that's the whole time. Every time I was moving on and transitioning, I'm like, is this what you want me to do? Is this what you want me to do? And it was very clear to me the whole time. I never really doubted it. And when we were in formation, I just kept getting closer and closer. I kept hearing, this, you're on the right path. You're on the right path. So that's my story. Any questions? We're over time, so. Well, my service project actually started out, this was kind of coincidental, it started out to work, both my parents I moved them from Kansas City. I'm a Kansas City native, Gladstone, St. Charles, over there. And when they got a little bit up in years, I moved them to Georgia to be 5 minutes from our house. And I would go over and visit them, but I ended up visiting 65 people in this nursing home every time, or assisted living community I went there. And I thought I was being called to really be involved with assisted living, nursing home type of things. And lo and behold, I come up here and come to work as a pastoral associate, and what do I get? Pastoral care. And so, but I had already pitched to the bishop long before we were actually required to. I said, I'd really like to do something with nursing homes and retirement centers and be involved with them. And, I don't think, Father, maybe you know better than I do, but I don't think there's another parish that has as many as we do within our boundaries. Yeah, that's exactly right. 17 is what I've got counted. Yeah. So now, that's still my official thing, but I've always felt a little awkward because it's also my job. Okay, so I went to Bishop Johnston when he came in, and I went to him just a couple of years ago, and I said, I'd really like to add to that. I don't want to not say I'm not going to do that anymore, but I really want to add to it. And so what I have started doing now is a lot of people take time to plan their their funerals. They're from a physical side. They plan where they're going to be buried, what casket they're going to have, and all that. But what I try to offer them is to pre-plan the spiritual side. So many of our families are some of the kids have fallen away, and they really don't know what you and I want when it's time for our funeral. And so I've started going around with Todd Dement out of Meyer when he hosts these pre-planned meetings, and I just sit there and offer up services. Anybody wants to come to me, and I don't make a distinction. You have to be the Catholic Church or anything. I just offer it up, and then he doesn't do this, but like 2 or 3 times a year, and for 2 or 3 times a year for about 2 months, I'm really busy, and then go. But now I've decided I'm going to start going to our Northland pod parishes and offering it up and trying to see if anybody wants to take advantage of that service, to pre-plan it and then store it at their church and at the funeral home that they're working with. So if any of you are interested, there it is. It's out there. Just call me and we can do that. Any other questions? Yeah. They're about to be ordained. Yes, they'll be ordained this in May, I believe it is. I'm trying to remember. June 18th. Thank you. And it's 17 right now. It's June 18, but there's 17 of them right now. So that'll be the biggest class I think ever in our diocese. Yes, I retired from Hallmark in 2009. I won't say that was really my idea. I was senior management, and the market fell for Hallmark. And I kind of saw it coming because I was getting paid a lot of money for what I did. And they let go a round of senior managers early on, and I was in that round to go. I had 31 years with them. And so I got a good incentive package to go. But it was like 4 or 5 years before I really wanted to go. Because I had this dream that I'd have my kids out of college before I was unemployed. But that didn't quite work out. Anything else?